Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Keisinger, and as always, on behalf of Studio B and our entire team, I want to welcome you to the third week of content presented as part of our Foundations of Steadiness program. I always want to remind everyone at the beginning, whether you're joining us here live or you're going to be listening to this or watching this at another time, to please remember that our courses from the previous 2 weeks, as well as our entire series on resiliency, is available to you here in this portal. So please take advantage of these offerings. They're really powerful, they're really beautiful, and they're really, really supportive during this period of time. So here we are in week 3, and the content that I want to present today was a real game changer for me. But to sort of set up the context for introducing today's content, I want to just remind you that during Monday's session and part of our session last week, I introduced to you the Whole Health Karen by Dr. Lissa Rankin. And on Monday, we moved through all of the stones of the Karen, and we talked about how each one is pivotal to our ability to experience and to build and to strengthen a sense of whole health. And although each of these stones is really, really important to our whole health, they are all interdependently related. So when something's not quite going well in one of these stones, all of the stones are affected. And the reason that I chose to share this particular model, there are lots of different models of whole health, but this one really resonates with this theme of steadiness, because the Karen in nature is an extremely balanced, steady structure. And if we're intentional and if we're aware and if desired, we can create a sense of steady whole health, even during the days of a global pandemic. The key feature of this model, of course, is the bottom stone, which refers to your own intuition, your own inner wisdom, and everything that it's always telling you about what would benefit you in terms of what needs to happen in all of these various stones. So the direction that I want to take us in today is to get us to start thinking about what is threatening to these stones. What does it mean to be triggered and why? In other words, how is it that we can find ourselves in situations where this structure called our whole health starts to feel like it might topple? So the topic we'll be looking at today is triggers and triggering. Before we launch into that, I just want to back up for a moment because I want to remind you of 4 questions that I left you with last time. I actually used these questions to structure our meditation practice during our session last time. And the questions are, what am I grateful for? Just one thing, like in this now moment, what am I grateful for? In this now moment, I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to be here knowing that the sun is shining today. It makes a big difference. What are the most energetically supportive things I can do for myself and for others today? Just today. How am I staying connected to those things or to that thing that really sustains me? And when we talked through the Karen, we talked about spirituality very broadly defined as that thing or those things, those practices that really sustain and nourish you. And the most important question, how will I choose to change at my deepest levels in the midst of a global transition that is affecting me at a personal level? What will I choose to change? How will I choose to change? This is a tremendous opportunity for change and growth. Okay, so this is just a nice inquiry that I wanted to take us back to. We closed our session last time with it so that you could start thinking about the notion of gratitude, the notion of support, the notion of connection, and the notion of choice as being 4 fundamental pillars of sorts that when you contemplate these important pillars, when you contemplate each one separately, the act of the contemplation itself can create a sense of steadiness. All right, so here we go. Triggers. Here's what I know about triggers. Everyone gets triggered, and we get triggered in a lot of different ways. And many of us might be able to even identify people in our life that tend to trigger us, situations that tend to trigger us, so that we might have quite a bit of awareness as to the things that trigger us. But most of us don't know why we get triggered. And that's really what today is all about. And the reason that it can be a game changer in terms of our own well-being and our own cultivation of mindfulness and our own ability to be steady even in tumultuous waters, the reason that it's important is because when I start to feel that I'm getting triggered, I can ask myself some really important questions about why that might be. And the ability to have an understanding about why I get triggered, and even more importantly, why people in my life get triggered. That insight, that knowledge can diminish the charge, the heat, the fire, the flooding, the reactivity of the trigger. So this knowledge doesn't mean that we won't get triggered anymore, but what it does mean is that the awareness can help us to diminish pretty greatly the intensity of the trigger. I like to use the image here of the newspaper on fire, because I know that one of the first signals, physical signals for me that I'm getting triggered, is that it literally feels like my hair is on fire. There's a lot of heat here at the crown of my head, which then tends to lead to just this sort of cognitive flooding that really interrupts my capacity to think clearly. And then a whole cascade of other things begin to happen. But usually the first sign is this feeling as if my hair is on fire. So as we're moving through, part of what you can do is to start thinking about, in what ways does the body tell you that you're being triggered? There are very, very clear physical signs that are indicators of triggering, and they're different for all of us. So we can experience triggers in various categories of our life. I think I mentioned last time that we can experience physical triggers. There are certain foods and beverages that trigger me at a physical level. Again, it's just the mere ingesting of these things can create a cascade of effects that once that snowball gets rolling, I have very little ability to stop it. There are certain emotional triggers, certain ways that we can begin to feel sort of a chaos or emotional hijacking or flooding related to the ways that we're feeling that really do impact a steadiness of our emotionality. And again, our emotional triggers are different. We can experience relational triggers. Certain family members can trigger us. I may have mentioned last time that significant others tend to be really, really powerful triggers to each other. One of the interesting things about that is if you can perhaps try on this notion that our closest, most significant relationships tend to be classrooms of sorts, or grounds for healing. That when you adopt that perspective, you begin to see that whenever I get triggered or you get triggered in the context of our relationship, those moments are always opportunities to learn and to grow. So it's not at all surprising that that one person who is our go-to can simultaneously be a really strong source of triggering. We can experience lots and lots of different triggers as parents. We can experience triggers in our parenting in relationship to our kids. And when there are multiple children involved, if parents really, really take a good look at their own triggering, they probably will have the realization that their children trigger them in different ways. And that the way my child triggered me when they were in their toddlerhood is going to be very different from how I get triggered when they're in middle school or in their early adult life. And then, of course, there are a whole host of professional triggers. So when we think about triggering, we want to think about it, again, holistically in terms of all of these various categories of our life. We might find triggering occurring. So how do you know you're triggered? Lots of different physical sensations. Triggering often shows up as the sensation of heat. Again, feeling like my hair is on fire, feeling like my body temperature is changing. I'm starting to sweat. Certainly, when I'm triggered, there is a very, very clear change in my heart rate. My heart rate tends to quicken. There's a change in the way that I'm breathing. My breathing becomes much quicker and more shallow. So in a sense, when I'm triggered at a physical level, it's because my stress response is simultaneously triggered. Stress response always comes in when we're triggered, because the act of being triggered is the moment that we feel threatened. There are lots of different emotional signs of being triggered. One of them I already mentioned, which is a sense of not being able to think straight. When I'm in a highly triggered state, I'm not very good at making decisions. Emotionally and mentally, I really love the term hijacked. I feel as if my brain, both my left and right side of the brain, my reasoning and logic, my problem-solving abilities, as well as that part of me that's highly emotional, creative, a little bit lighter, it's all just drowning. You know, it's like a flooding, it's flooding. And it's a hijack that happens really quickly. This is one of the reasons why we can almost always use the word triggered simultaneous with the word reactive. Lots of different communicative signs that indicate that I'm triggered. One of the most common signs in our communication that we're being triggered is that we find it very difficult to string together a sentence. We actually feel like we're unable to speak. I know people for whom, when they get triggered, they actually can't speak. They are rendered speechless. I know individuals who, when they are triggered, the anxiety that's associated with being triggered will cause them to stutter. I know people who, when they are triggered communicatively, don't seem to have any capacity to stop themselves from saying things that are going to be really hurtful and diminishing. Again, it's almost as if you're completely hijacked and you have lost a capacity to control your own speech, and to be in touch with that part of yourself that's able to discern and to say, okay, I want to say this, And I know that if I do this, there's going to be consequences for that. I want to say these things, but I know that there's going to be an impact that might be really, really damaging. That ability to discern, make a distinction between what I want to say and impact, for many of us is completely eradicated, erased when we're in a highly triggered state. So just notice, how does your communication change when you feel triggered? Lots of relational signs that we're triggered. We might find ourselves, again, getting really angry, frustrated, irritated, agitated. These are all signs of triggering. We might find that we're blowing up. We might find that we are closing in, hiding, leaving, shutting down, numbing out, freezing. What does all this have in common? All of this has in common is stress response is full on when we're triggered. And then there are also signs in our work and in our productivity that indicate that we're being triggered. When triggering occurs, it's very difficult to be focused, to be really attentive. Concentration is compromised. When we're triggered, it's very difficult to set a goal that's reasonable and appropriate, and then to take the very, very clear, decisive steps necessary to achieve that goal. Very difficult to meet deadlines when we're in a triggered state. I could talk about the signs and the symptoms of being triggered for a day. So I just want to be clear that I'm just highlighting some of the ways that might be indicators for you that you're triggered. And hopefully, as I was moving through those and giving some examples, some things might have come to mind. If it is true that you're struggling with being triggered and that this is something that you'd really like to work on, I would like to invite you to take a screenshot of this slide and to maybe spend a little bit of time jotting down physical sensations that sort of come up in you when you're triggered. What are your emotional signs? How does triggering show up in your communication? What relational indicators are there that show that I'm triggered or that the person or people I love are triggered? And then what does triggering look like in my work? This is important because the more insight you can have about what your own triggering looks like in a really comprehensive way, the better you're going to get at noticing the signs when they come up. In other words, I have come to realize that before I become full-on triggered, there is this very small period of time before the full-on triggering. And when we're mindful, we develop the capacity to actually interrupt the process. So the way that you want to think about triggering is sort of like the snowball. Once the snowball gets rolling, it just grows and it grows and it grows. And the larger it gets, the potentially more destructive it can get, right? So if I'm able to identify, wow, my breath just changed, or I just walked into this room and this person is in the room that I know is a trigger for me, and I didn't know that he or she was going to be here, and all of a sudden I start to feel like, oh, that, you know, for me, it's very viscerally physical first. When I can be in tune with those signs and signals, I can interrupt the process. And then sometimes I can't. When I'm tired, when I'm hungry, when I'm depleted, when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm really anxious, when I'm depressed, my capacity to interrupt the rolling snowball is really compromised. So I would encourage this of anyone to really just sit down and work through what are the sensations and the signs that I feel in all of these different areas that are key indicators that I'm triggered, so that you can too get to that place where you can realize I'm in the pre-triggered state and I need to intervene or I need to interrupt so that this doesn't go full blown. All right, so these are some important categories of our lived experience, categories of our lives, and what are the signs that indicate triggering. So the hallmark of today's lesson is an introduction to what is known as the SCARF model, which really is a wonderful way of showing us how it is that we come undone in the first place. I want to talk just briefly about my relationship to the SCARF model and how I came to it in the first place, why I'm almost a zealot about teaching it because it's had so much value in my life, and then the ways that I hope that you'll be using it in order to continue to cultivate your own steadiness. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I was teaching a course in the School of Business at a local university, and the course was a course on creativity and innovation. And part of the course was to talk with my students about human motivation. What motivates us to do the things we're doing? What motivates us to not do certain things? What motivates us to make our decisions, to not make certain decisions? What motivates me to choose a certain brand of toothpaste when there are an array of brands I can choose from? What motivates me to turn away from certain people that I might meet for the first time and decide that's not someone I'm going to pursue a relationship with? In other words, what motivates us to do the things we do or to refrain from doing certain things or making certain decisions? And I stumbled upon the SCARF model, which comes from the work of Dr. David Rock, who was interested in this question. And I was interested in his model because it's more contemporary. There are lots of different models out there on human motivation, but this one is a little more recent. So what I came to understand about the model is that it's not just useful for understanding what motivates us or what deters us. It's a really wonderful model that illustrates what fundamentally human beings need, sort of in a really clearly defined way. SCARF is an acronym that represents a number of human needs, 5 really critical human needs. And that when these needs that we all possess are threatened, we will become triggered. So the model then becomes very useful. As I mentioned earlier, when I work through SCARF, I get a sense of why I get triggered. It's because there are certain needs that I have, that everyone has, that are sort of under fire right now, or being fired at, or are threatened in some way, or I perceive that they're being threatened in some way. But even more important for me, when I learned the model and I really started to work with the model, I realized that I could be in a situation where someone else is really triggered. And rather than meeting their triggering with a triggered state, I could kind of hang back a little bit, assess the situation, and really get a sense of why they might be triggered in the first place. And when I can do that, rather than coming back with, a lot of charge and a lot of energy and a lot of my own reactivity, I can respond to what it is that's having them come undone. And I can respond with understanding and I can respond with compassion and even empathy. So watch very closely human dynamics around triggering and kind of test this out for yourself or in what you observe. Is it true that most of us meet a triggered state with a triggered state? In other words, when someone is really reactive, angry, agitated, irritated, especially when it's directed toward you, just notice what the human tendency is. The human tendency is to come back at that. It's really a form of what we call mirroring or resonance. The opposite is also true. And it reminds me of that quote that I used a number of times in our resiliency series, which is this idea that calm is contagious. So if I opt in what is potentially a really triggered moment to come at it with a lot of calm and responsiveness, I can also dissipate the charge that might also be present in whoever else is with me or whoever else is in the room. So it's really powerful. So I want to go through the acronym and give you a sense of what each of the letters mean. And I want you to think about a couple of things as I'm moving through the acronym. And I would like for you to ask yourself, of these 5 letters that represent 5 human needs that, are really triggered when they're threatened, which one or 2 for me right now would make the top of my list? It's really important before I go through these that I say that every person on the planet has a need for the things that are on this screen. And I don't think there's anyone who would argue this. We all need the things that are on this screen, but we need them to different degrees. And that's a really, really important distinction. We all need these things, but we need them to different degrees. And if you look very deeply, you might realize that some of these things you needed very, very desperately during some phases in your life. And you might not have as much of a need for them now. So these needs can change over time, and they can change given the situation you're in, the context you're in. I'll talk a little bit about this pandemic in terms of these needs once we move through them, because it's actually really important. It's an important key that unlocks why there's so much anxiety and fear and overwhelm right now. So let's begin with the S. The S represents status. I wish that there was another word, because I don't think that status quite accurately captures what is meant by the S. So I'm going to break it down. Status refers to our very real human need to know where we fit in. We like to know if we belong and how we belong. We like to know, what is my place in this situation? What is my place in this organization? How do I fit in this family? Where do I stand in this social circle? Where do I stand in elementary school when I'm just kind of trying to figure it all out? There are certain periods of time in our life where we can really look back and see, oh man, my need for status, my need for belonging and understanding sort of where am I in the hierarchy of things here means a lot, right? You want to think about your earliest experiences in your friendship groups, time on the playground or recess, or in your elementary school classroom. Cliques, different sorts of friendships. You may recall a period of time, girls tend to go through this. This has actually been studied and written about, but girls in elementary school tend to go through periods of time where they will claim a best friend. You are my best friend, and only you. And that's an expression of this high need for status. Like we are going to publicly proclaim to each other that we are best friends as a way of establishing how it is that we belong. We belong to each other. And then, of course, that can change in a day or a week. And then there are all kinds of threats to that, and we get really upset. So when we're working with younger people, and we might feel triggered and frustrated by something that seems so silly to us, like, why are you limiting yourself to just one friend? Or why do you care about that friendship breaking up? You have lots of friends. It's because at that age, developmentally, we get upset, we get so triggered because this fundamental need to know, how do I fit in? That's how it's getting manifested. This doesn't ever go away. At some level, we're always trying to figure that out. Think about the organization that you might currently work in, and how often you think about, where do I stand here? What's my place here? What's my role? Where am I on the hierarchy here? So this notion of where do I fit in? What's my role? How do I belong? Organizationally speaking right now is really triggered because many of us don't know. I was furloughed. For anyone who's been furloughed or laid off, do I belong to this organization anymore? Where do I fit in? Is this temporary? Will this be forever? Children who have been essentially torn from their classrooms. They were in class on a Friday locally in Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania. They were in school on a Friday, and then they go back on Monday, and they didn't really have any heads up that they weren't going back on Monday. How do I fit in with my classmates? How do I belong to this school as a whole? This school district, or whatever the school is called. And here I am learning with my friends on Zoom. How do I figure all that out? Oh, I can't see myself on the screen. There's 30 kids here that are learning on Zoom, but I can't see myself. Can my teacher not see me? Does that mean something about my status? All kinds of questions about where do I belong, where do I fit in right now are coming up. This is also true of families where parents might also together be working at home. We're all home together. We're working and we are parenting and we are homeschooling, and who's doing what? Who should be taking on what role? You can see, I could keep going. You can see how status right now is receiving a real shakeup. There's a high potential for triggering because we just don't know where we stand. Okay? That's status. Certainty makes perfect sense. I think most of us would agree that human beings have a very strong need for routine and structure and planning, and we want to know what's happening, what's going to happen, what just happened. Again, it's really important to know that some of us need this more than others. You might know people for whom certainty is their top need. And whenever certainty is compromised in any way, they are so triggered and they freak out. It's very, very difficult to cope when the routine and the plan is upset. Guess what? There's no certainty right now, or there's very little certainty. So if you've been feeling really triggered over the course of the last 9 weeks, there you go. It might be because certainty for you is a firm foundation from which you stand up in your life. And that's been blasted apart. That firm foundation isn't there anymore. We don't know where a lot of things stand. And so much of our suffering is related to the inability to just sit in the discomfort of that. To sit in the discomfort of the truth that I try my best, try to plan out my day, but I don't know what's going to happen. And the phrase, cliche, the one thing we can be certain of is that nothing is certain. Most of us live in just denial about it because it's so uncomfortable, but now we're living it. We are absolutely living it. So think about certainty and what happens to you when your certainty is threatened. Does it contribute to you feeling like you're starting to unravel or come undone? Autonomy is interesting and it's really powerful. Again, every human being on the planet needs to have a sense of autonomy and independence. Our drive for autonomy and independence shifts and changes over time. There are times in our life where it really, really matters and it shows up as our highest, strongest need. And then there are times in our life where it sort of wanes, but it's always there. I'll give you 2 examples of sort of the expression of independence and how important it is. I've had the privilege of watching 2 of my nephews who were born 6 months apart. One is 18 months now. My other nephew just turned 1 year of age. And I see them quite often. And I've been very aware of their innate drive for independence exerting itself even in the earliest stages of their life. I think that this is really apparent when you see or witness how hard they work at learning how to walk, which begins with the crawling and then the pulling themselves up. It's almost as if the urge for, or the drive for that independence and autonomy has transpired or evolved in a way that's strikingly similar. They're 6 months apart, but I've watched it evolve in a very similar fashion. So there's something very innate about our capacity to learn how to walk and to desire to walk. But it's really interesting that once they get going and they're able to move, the various directions they move in, which is away from their primary caregivers. You see them starting to crawl away. They might pause and turn back just to make sure you're there, and then they keep going. And then they're going further and further and further. And it can drive us crazy because we want to keep them safe, and they're all over the place and they're touching everything and they're exploring. And that is human drive for independence, innate, exerting itself. And then on the other side of it all, on the other end of the timeline, you see what can happen to someone in advanced age who begins to lose really important symbols of their independence. I'll never forget when my mother's father, my grandfather, he was close to 90 years of age, and they had to take his car keys away. Very healthy all of his life, but really began experiencing some cognitive issues that made driving unsafe. Highly independent guy. Devastated to have the car keys taken away. And I knew in that moment that it was going to go downhill. And it did. He died about 18 months later. And at the time he had his car keys taken away, he was in good health. He just wasn't safe for him to drive. Think about the meaning of the car keys when you were 16 and what a big deal that was. And that first drive that you took alone or with friends when you got your license. And the thrill of that and the exhilaration of that is all about feeding your need for independence. So we're very serious about our independence, but some of us are more serious than others. Some of us, this is strong and don't you dare threaten it. So when our independence is threatened, we get really uncomfortable and we can get very, very fierce in response to that and really, really triggered. So here we find ourselves in a global pandemic, forced to stay home. We need only look at social media to read the various posts of people who are highly triggered by this idea that I have to stay home. Crawling out of our skins because we shouldn't just get in the car and go where we want to go and do what we want to do. That stay-at-home orders, that part of, many of us are willing to do our part, but man, it's starting to feel really, really tight in here. And it's that tightness is, I just want that independence to find expression. So, wow, what's happening here? What's going on? All my certainty is gone. How do I fit into this scenario in my organization, in my family, in my life in general? Things aren't fitting in all of a sudden. How does it all fit together? Status is threatened. Independence is threatened. So one of the things we know about this model is that people freak out. We get really triggered when one of these things is threatened. But what happens when 3 of these things are threatened or 5 of these things are threatened? Wow, we've now laid the groundwork for big reactivity. So it might sound counterintuitive, but it's really important to know, and this will make perfect sense as well, that just like we're born hardwired for independence, we are also born hardwired for connection, because we won't live. We will not live without human connection. It is as necessary to us as oxygen. Think about all of the times in your life where a relationship that mattered to you was threatened for whatever reason. How upsetting that can be, how distressing it can be, how paralyzing it can be. Emotional upset related to relational threat is profoundly uncomfortable and can drive people to act in very irrational, emotionally flooded, can cause them to react in ways that they might later regret. So there's a lot of charge that occurs when our relationships are threatened. And then F, fairness. Again, this is going to make a lot of sense to you, but there's a couple of things that I like to add to the notion of fairness. When I believe or perceive that I'm not being treated fairly, that can cause triggering, and that makes perfect sense. But what we also want to think about here is whenever you feel as if you are not being treated with dignity and respect, that's also going to create triggering. So when we think about the word fairness, the F here in the SCARF model, we also want to think about dignity and respect. When I see that I'm not, or feel that I'm not being treated with dignity and respect, and if I notice that someone I love or a group of people are not being treated with dignity and respect, again, lots of charge to that. I can get really, really triggered, and for very good reasons. So I want to qualify all of this by saying that when any of these things are threatened, status, certainty, autonomy, independence, relationship, and fairness, dignity, respect, when any of these things are threatened, it makes perfect sense that we would get triggered. I would worry about us as human beings if we didn't get triggered, if there wasn't sort of a charge behind it. But it never ever means that we have to go into high reactivity to the point where we are saying and doing things that we regret, where we are so flooded that we're not able to function well, cognitively, emotionally, relationally, or that it is beginning to impact our physical well-being. So the next time that you're feeling the charge of being triggered, however that feels for you or whatever that looks like, I want to invite you to pause, and I want you to know something. The moment that you have the realization or the awareness, oof, I'm starting to feel triggered. You've just had a mindful moment. That's mindfulness. Mindfulness goes far beyond the work that you do when you're in your meditation periods. Bravo, brava, mindfulness. Wow, I'm feeling the triggering come up. Take that to the next level, or extend that awareness, that pause, just a little bit longer and say, let me take myself through SCARF and see what's behind this triggering. Do I feel threatened related to how I fit in? Am I wondering about what's happening here or what's going to happen? Is my certainty being threatened? Is my independence being threatened? Is our connectedness being threatened right now? Is there some way that I think that I'm being treated unfairly or without dignity and respect? So run yourself through the model. Once you start working with it, it becomes almost second nature. So when I was first introduced to this model and I started teaching about it in terms of human motivation, and then I started thinking about it a little bit differently, I decided I was going to write these 5 words on a note card. And I was just going to carry that note card around with me for a month, that I wanted to work with the SCARF model for 1 month in this way. And that every time that I felt triggered, I noticed, and then I ran myself through SCARF. And by the end of the 30 days, I knew SCARF by heart. And now it's with me all the time. It's really part of how I live. Whenever I teach something like this that has had a lot of impact on my life, I always make sure that I work with it for a period of usually 30 to 90 days before I'll teach it, because I know that this works and has made a big impact in my life. So mindfulness, I'm getting triggered. Okay, I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to run myself through SCARF. I'm going to see what it is. Wow, right now, I kind of feel like you're trying to suffocate me. You're holding me back. You're stifling my independence, or the situation is stifling my independence. So that's what's getting triggered here. Once I know that that's what it is, it really does diminish the charge of it all. It's like an interruption in this, what can feel like getting on a speeding train and not being able to get off. I don't feel like that anymore related to things that trigger me, because this model can be so valuable. At the same time, and this is the part of the model and using it that I really love, when you're in the presence of another person who's coming undone, whether you're just observing it happen or they're triggered and getting really reactive in a way that they're taking it out on you, that you're sort of the recipient of all their upset, same thing. Oh, I see that this person in front of me is coming undone. They're really angry at me or irritated, frustrated, whatever it is. They're sort of spewing all of that out in my direction. Rather than coming back at them with reactivity, again, I just, inside of myself, I take a moment. All right, in what way right now might this person be really, really terrified because they don't know how they belong right now? Or might this person be upset because the routine is really different? Or they're feeling like their independence is not being able to be expressed, or they feel like our relationship is threatened, or another relationship is threatened, or they feel like they're not being treated fairly with dignity and respect. And if I can answer any of those questions, that's when, rather than coming back at them with a lot of defensiveness, I can really soften and think, wow, I have a lot of compassion because I know how much certainty means to her. Or I know this little guy is trying to figure out where he fits into his friend circle on Zoom. Or I know how rough it is for this teenager of mine to have to stay at home when at this time in her life, her independence means more than anything. So when I can get a sense, and I can never be fully certain of what's triggering another person, but by God, I have a tool now that gives me insight into myself and to others. And when I have that insight, I move myself into the space, always, always, always of choice. I'm triggered, or I'm about to be, and I get to decide if I'm going to get on the speeding train or not, if I'm going to interrupt the process. So that's SCARF. Again, take a screenshot of the image, come back to this teaching whenever you like, but I really invite you, work with it. Work with it for a day. And notice every time you start to get triggered, run yourself through and just see what you learn about yourself. And then if you sort of enjoy how it feels to work with this, work with it another day and then another day, and maybe consider a week or 2 weeks or the whole month. And start using it not just within yourself, but in observing others and watching others, and see what it starts to illuminate. So before we depart, again, when you look at these, right now, during this period of time, what would you identify as your top 2 threats? Maybe it's I don't really know where I fit in terms of my work situation, and nothing is certain. So right now, S and C are really threatened, or maybe it's two others, but which two would you circle? Remembering that we all need these things. A global pandemic has all five of these things threatened globally. So if you're looking around the world, watching the news, looking at social media, if you're glimpsing the world and you're wondering, why is everyone in high reactivity? It's right here on this screen. Everyone's wondering, how do I fit in here? When is certainty going to return? When is our independence coming back? All of our connections seem to be crazy, unstable. Social distancing is a threat to human connection. And you know what? It doesn't feel quite fair that we have to live through this, or that we've been living through it for 9 weeks now. But what are your top two? And then what do you think are the top two of the person that you're closest to? If you just close your eyes and like, okay, who's this person? The one person that I spend the most time with, or that I would identify as my person, my most significant other. What do you believe, or what would you predict would be their two top needs that, when threatened, put them in a triggered state? And then between now and the next time I see you, how does understanding this model help you to understand yourself better and understand others? So I want to thank you for being here today. We're out of time. When we come back on Monday, which is the final week of our steadiness course, I'm going to finish up. I'm going to have some concluding remarks on this SCARF model, and also take you through an inquiry, one final inquiry related to triggering. And then we're going to launch into something much softer. We're going to look at the science and the art of compassion, with a special emphasis on something that's really difficult for a lot of us. It's got a lot of research behind it right now in terms of how important it is, and that is self-compassion. So please return to be with us tomorrow, 2 p.m., for a practice with our founder and CEO, Jennifer Sarambuli. And then please come back and join us on Friday for our featured interview, which I think you're going to really love. So take good care. Again, thank you for being here, and I will see you soon.